In my last video, I made the Leviathan axe from God of War Ragnarok. This time, we're going to make Thor's hammer from God of War Ragnarok. Except this time I'm going to make it so every time you pick it up, it'll turn on some lights without the use of any buttons, switches, or anything that is visible to the naked eye. It'll be entirely compact inside the hammer, and you will never be able to tell if there's anything special going on with it if you just look at it. Before we get started, most viewers of these videos aren't subscribed. I make all types of content, like one's very similar to this, and one's even a little different. So why not subscribe? It's free and you can unsubscribe at any time. And all it's going to do is hurt my feelings, so think of the power you hold. Anyway, let's get back to the video. Okay, so I think the first step here will be to find the measurements of the actual hammer. So I found a website here, somebody selling supposedly a replica 1:1 scale, and it's saying that the size is 49 by 33 by 12 centimeters. That feels really big, but I suppose in the game Thor was part giant and pretty massive, so maybe that's accurate. So we'll do that. So first things first, we'll put an image into Fusion 360, scale it up to the proper size of 33 centimeters. From there we can start tracing around the outside of the part, and that'll give us the first piece that we can put onto the plasma cutter to get cut. It's also important to note, during this step I also traced out all the engravings on the hammer to have the plasma cutter cut those out. However, I'm a little concerned because I know the plasma cutter cuts with a very thick line. That's a thick ass boy! Damn! But we're gonna give it a try anyway. Now with that out of the way, it's time to start plasma cutting. It really never gets old watching this. It's so satisfying. Cuts through it like butter. Or like really thick, chunky butter, because like my plasma cutter cuts really slow, but like still cool. Oh, also this cut actually failed. You can see the torch ran up against the side, causing it to lose track of where it was, and then it really messed up the cut. So unfortunately, I actually had to do a whole different cut. You can see that here.
I'm not sure.
So now I'm at the part where I'm a little worried. I have to actually engrave it. We're going to have to be a little creative with that. Unfortunately, it won't be as great resolution. We're going to be missing a few of the engravings, and it's going to look a little different. But still, it gets the point across, and that's kind of what we're going for here. So here it is after it's been engraved, and yeah, I won't lie, it's a little ugly. It would definitely get made fun of in school. But with a little work, I think we can get it to something usable. From there, we cut out a piece that'll go on the side to add some depth. I then welded it all on, and we'll just be cutting the video there because I don't need to be made fun of for my welds today. Thank you. And here we got a little bit more welding going on, which we won't show. Well, you know what? How bad could it be? I probably did not that bad, right? Oh, no, that's pretty bad. Okay. Anyway, let's move on from that. From here, we just kind of continued on working on the sides, cutting out pieces, welding them on. And then we got to the rounded part under the hammer. This took a lot of hammering and bending and cutting and stuff to be able to get to the proper shape and roundness, but we did eventually get it and welded that on as well. And by this point, we've actually got a pretty decent shape of the hammer coming out. Okay, so now I think it's time we move on to the electronics. So as I mentioned, with this project, I want it so that every time you lift up the hammer, it'll turn on some lights and they'll stay on until it detects that it's no longer being held. So to do that, we're going to have to design our own internal chassis as well as our own PCB. Okay, so let me explain how this is actually going to work. Since obviously this has to be battery powered, unless we want this thing to just die within a day, we're going to have to implement sleep mode. Now, to wake up from sleep mode, you either would use an internal timer or an external source. I don't want to use timers because it's just not very great for this scenario, so we're going to use an external source. But I already said we're not using any buttons or switches. So to wake this up, we're going to use an accelerometer. Now this is really cool because the accelerometer that I'm going to use is one that uses incredibly low amounts of power, like less than the Arduino does in sleep mode, and has an ability to wake things up from sleep whenever it detects a certain amount of movement, all using super low amounts of power. So this is, it's pretty cool. So with all that information done, all we have to do is build the circuit and get a PCB. I'm building my PCB from a site called Elcro. They give insanely cheap PCBs for like $1 or $2 per PCB as long as you only order once a day. The only issue is that it takes like 2.5 weeks to finally get it there. Thankfully, we only have to do this once. Anyway, let's get back to the hammer. So where were we? Oh right, it looks like shit. Let's fix that. So let's grind down all the edges and get them to a nice sharp corner and get everything nice and smooth. I don't actually have footage of me doing this, so I'm just using some footage before the step I'm at, but I mean, you get the point, it's all the same. Also, make sure you're always wearing the proper metal protection when doing this. Anyway, we've got this thing looking significantly better now, and despite what it looks like, this handle actually isn't being held on by anything. That's strictly for show. So let's actually fix that. There's those beautiful welds again. Bet y'all thought you weren't going to see that again in this video, but I surprised you. Here they are. Now, of course, I had to take it out and play with it. You know, swing it around, get a feel for it, bang it.
Okay, that's pretty freaking sweet.
You're right, Taitum. That is pretty freaking sweet. Okay, so a little update. So I noticed after checking the gerbers again that I actually messed them up a little bit. The size is actually too big to fit into the metal tube that I'm using as a chassis. And I also got a couple connections wrong. So because of that, I'm just going to fix it, remake it, and then order a new one since it's so cheap. Unfortunately, their PCBs take about 2 weeks to arrive. But thankfully, we only have to do this twice. So then we're making this crown. This one has a bunch of weird turns and shapes and stuff in it. And it's overall just a really weird piece that wraps around the hammer. But I started by cutting out all the shapes for the piece. And from there, I just started welding them together and making this sort of weird weaved pattern around them. And getting the first side done was actually pretty simple. It worked, honestly, pretty well. It fit pretty well. The problem started to arise when I started to do the other side. Then it was all cockeyed and warped, and that took a lot of rework. But eventually I got it to work. Which means now I can start decorating. So I spray painted that crown gold, and then following the same thing I did for my axe, I used the method cold bluing, which gave the metal more of a darker look to it. And finally, after all this, the hammer is done. Or at least the physical part. We haven't done the electronics yet, but the hammer is done. Okay, so with the hammer done, now it's time we actually work on the electronics. So we did get in the PCBs that we ordered for the second time, and I discovered more issues. It still doesn't fit. It's very close, but it doesn't quite fit. And I've also noticed that all the holes and everything are off. I went and re-looked, and I discovered that I did the entire project in mils, not millimeters, and there is a very big difference. But we're in luck. We can easily make a new fix, and Elcro sells PCBs for really cheap. Unfortunately, it takes them about 2 weeks for new ones to come in, but thankfully we only have to do this 3 times. For me, it'll take 2 weeks. For you, it'll be done like that. Because they're actually already in. I'm recording this after the fact. So here's the new ones. They're blue this time, and it actually fits. So we can finally start building this thing. So I designed this chassis for all the parts to go into that'll be 3D printed. So down at the bottom here we can attach the battery, and then the middle we'll be able to attach the PCB, and then wires will be able to run through this top section where the LED will sit. And the overall thing is the full length of the actual handle for the hammer, so it should fit in perfectly. Now I just have to test the circuit itself, see if it wakes up, see if it puts itself to sleep, make sure it's giving out the right values. And then from there I just have to attach the LED to its heatsink and start assembling this thing. And then, of course, give it that one final test. Okay, it's going to be test number 1. So, I should be able to move it, it should turn on, and then it should turn off after a couple seconds. So it should ramp up. Yes, nice, okay, it woke up. That was kind of my biggest worry. And will it put itself back to sleep? Yes, oh, fuck. Yes, finally. Well, everything's working by itself, so I think all we gotta do now is assemble this thing and see what she looks like as a finished product. Well, I think that's as far as I'm gonna go with the hammer. There's definitely things I can improve. As you can see, the sides of the hammers don't light up as well as I had hoped. Maybe adding some more lights would fix that. I'd also like to add some audio in the future, just kind of like it does in the game, some whooshing noises. And though I don't plan on really doing any more of these weapon projects, as I've already done 2 of them, my next video is going to be me making the world's most advanced smart desk, with things like a built-in monitor, built-in home assistant, and even a built-in drink dispenser eventually. So if that's something that interests you, be sure to hit that subscribe button. See you later, guys.